The Idries Shah Foundation Podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation Podcast. On this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from the Idries Shah Anthology. Eastern Cults. Question. Legitimate Sufi study is anything but a cult, but what is to be the eventual effect of the imported Eastern ones on the West? Answer. People import the most peculiar cults from the East, clean them up a little, and package them for use in the West. When people from Europe and America go eastwards, they usually become rather silent about what they have found on their return. If they only knew how one animal can appear to be another, as in a famous joke, they might think twice before getting involved. Because there are few admonitions about this matter already in Western culture, on the whole only threats from bigots trying to preserve their own frightful cults, people don't suspect the dangers until the cult has done its work. We have found it useful to use a gentler, allegorical method. I quote the dogfight legend. There was once a man walking a very funny-looking dog who met another man with a champion bulldog in some fields. "I bet my dog can beat yours," said the owner of the bulldog. "Not likely," challenged the other man. So they started them fighting for a wager. Within 3 minutes, the strange beast had practically eaten the bulldog alive. Paying his money over, the bulldog's master said, "That's a very strange-looking animal you have there, mustard-coloured with a huge face." "Yes," said the other man, "but you should have seen him before I cut off his mane and clipped his tail." We shall see, in the West, what the result is to be when the lion starts to maraud. Spiritual exercises. Question. How is it that so many people seem to become unhinged when they carry out spiritual exercises laid down by gurus and other teachers? If people are overdoing things, what of the proverb, "If a lot of something is bad, a little of it is also bad"? Answer. It is all a matter of measure, as in everything. If you took even the multiplication tables and used them when you did not need them, you might become abnormal. Have you not heard the Kashmiri story of the farmer who got all his grain in and found that he had only enough for 10 months' food? He said to himself, "This means that I lack food for 2 months of this ensuing year. It is best to get the worst over first." So he decided to fast for 2 months, after which he would have food for 10 months. Naturally, fasting for so long, he died. So he lost his life and did not need the remainder of the grain. The Sentry and the Vault. A powerful king was entering his palace amid a concourse of soldiers, his personal guard, whose accoutrements gleamed with silver, gold, and precious gems. As he was passing, a sentry, who believed that such manifestations of wealth and power were vain and foolish, was overcome by these reflections and shouted, "If you have wealth, you can do anything. Wealth is all you need. There is nothing but appearance and show, and those things are bought with treasure." The soldier was seized and taken to where the king sat on his throne. "Are you convinced that all that anyone needs is to be surrounded by wealth, and that wealth is power?" asked the king. "Yes, I am," said the sentry, who had given up all hope for his life. "In that case," said the king, "I am prepared to try an experiment. You shall have all the wealth you can imagine." He ordered that the soldier be placed in a vault, and that he be surrounded with bricks of gold and silver, and have sacks of jewels piled around him. Then the vault was to be bricked up. Now it so happened that a certain dervish was present at court on that day, and he heard the verdict and the orders being given for the soldier's immurement. When the man had been sealed in his prison, the dervish approached it by night and carefully, quietly, made a small hole in the wall of the vault, so that he could speak to the soldier. He whispered, "I have started the process. Now it is for you to see what will happen, and how your destiny may go from here." The soldier was surprised, but he was somewhat grateful for having some sort of communication with the real world outside. After a day or two, when he was getting very hungry, he began to shout down the hole in the wall, and his voice happened to come to the ears of a goldsmith who was passing. The goldsmith went to the hole and heard the soldier's story. He went home, brought back a forked stick, withdrew some of the jewels which the soldier offered him. In this way he supplied the prisoner with food and water day after day, getting paid in jewels. After some weeks, the soldier found that time was hanging very heavily on his hands, and he asked the goldsmith for some metalworking tools. With these he made a flute for himself out of the gold in the vault, and practiced melodies which he played to provide some recreation. As he played, however, the prisoner began to think, "I have gold and silver and jewels, I have food and water and amusement, but I have no freedom." His tunes became more and more plaintive, and he became more and more wrapped up in them as his thoughts sought to understand his condition and to probe as to whether he could ever escape. One day the dervish came past the hole in the wall of the vault to see what was happening. The soldier said, "I have everything except freedom. Can you not help me to escape? After all, I have a king's ransom in treasure here for anyone who will let me out." The dervish answered, "Such are the conditions of this world that I cannot directly help you to escape. If the king were to find out, then I would lose my position at court, and would not be able to help people as I have, to some extent, helped you. If you want to escape intensely enough, however, you will achieve it." And he went away. The soldier concentrated his mind upon his desire to escape and on his former superficiality in believing that wealth was enough to attain anything, and this had an effect on his music. So powerful and haunting did the flute-playing become that the king, walking nearby one day, was enchanted by it. He asked what it could be. A search was made, and in the vault, instead of a withered skeleton, the soldier was found alive and well, playing on his golden flute. When the man was brought before him, the king said, "And who might you be?" The soldier said, "Your Majesty, you will remember that I am the man whom you immured in the vault with gold and silver, for saying that wealth was everything." The king asked, "And what do you think about things now?" "I have learnt," said the soldier, "that first of all a man needs a friend, like the dervish who made the beginning of my new life possible and saved me from death. Second, money can be used, as it was useful to the goldsmith, but it is useless without friends. Thirdly, these things are useless without skills. Skills are useless without their application. Application without recreation. Recreation without freedom. But everything, if my experiences are any guide, is useless without the intervention of someone who knows what can be done and who does it, who digs the hole in the wall of the vault." And so the king released the soldier, and he went on to other adventures, but those are part of another story. Observation. Many people, hearing that Sufis are often highly observant, imagine that by developing this faculty, instead of the analogous one of a higher-level observation capacity, they will become wise, and fail to understand that observation is important in relation to the things observed, not to the faculty alone. In order to correct these impressions, the following story has been told. A Sufi was a witness in a court case. The judge said, "How many steps did this man fall down?" The Sufi said, "I don't know." "You mean to say that you put yourself forward as a witness," shouted the judge, "and you cannot answer a simple question?" The Sufi said, "And how long has your honor been a judge in this court?" 20 years. "And can you tell me the number of beams in the roof of this hall?" People still behave absurdly in spite of such instructional tales. As a wise man once said, "If anyone delights in mud, clear water will not attract him." Running a study group. Question: what is the best qualification for running a study group? Answer: common sense. If one has this and works carefully with the materials, a sensitivity is developed which becomes the permanent qualification or capacity. You would be surprised how many people show that they are not using common sense. There is a famous anecdote about this. The reason. There was once a man who had been put in charge of a study group. He decided to introduce supposedly spiritual exercises and took some from a book. The people all became excited, and they all thought that something important was moving in them. Then this group leader read somewhere else that it was only after people were not excited by exercises that they could develop higher understanding. So he carried on the exercises to look for such people. Most of them just became more and more hysterical, but one never seemed to be affected at all. "Well," said our hero to himself, "at least we have one real student here." When the music and dancing and jumping up and down and swaying were finished for the evening, he went up to the man and asked him to follow him into his private room so that they could have a talk. The man cupped his hand to his ear. "What did you say?" he asked. What is missing? Question: I have studied 6 religions, psychological and mystic systems as deeply as I could, and several others to a lesser extent. Each time I have come to the conclusion that something is missing from them. Answer: perhaps you would be interested if we put up against this reaction the fact that there is also a contrary side. By this I mean, of course, that every single religion, psychology, and mystical system can provide numerous examples of people who feel the exact opposite. Such system, they hold, not only has nothing missing, it contains for them everything, and all the others are probably, by the same token, lacking something. People who believe that they will find something in a thing will tend to find it, and this includes such things as contentment with a system. People, on the other hand, who have something missing, or not yet found, in themselves, and exteriorize this sense, are looking for imperfection even in something they are studying. They will bring this sense of lack to the subject in question, and will attribute this sense of something missing to the materials, the people, the system. In more recent years, say the past 40 or 50, there has been a growing understanding of this syndrome, while it is not uncommon to read in former times of people who were obviously misfits drifting from one thing to another, and calling everyone and everything else a misfit or incomplete. Yet Rumi, for instance, clearly says 700 years ago, The lack is in you, fortunate one, and not in it or them. The very act of finding things or other people unsatisfactory is in itself a partial therapy for this condition. It is a temporarily effective, though logically and in reality fallacious, solution to the perplexity situation. I can't find whatever I am looking for because it is not there at all. It must be somewhere else. This is, quite simply, one of the options in any study or search. Another one is, of course, I am too stupid to understand it. A third, I will find out in due course. And a fourth, I must try harder. The unconscious projection of one's own problems onto others helps to reduce tension. But what about the real situation? If the projection, the self-therapy, also becomes a fixed belief that it is true, it may prevent people from actually sticking to something long enough to benefit from it, or it may make them seek more therapy, more and more fads and systems, to get the little bit of satisfaction that comes through the self-fulfilling prophecy that there is nothing there, it is incomplete. This is an example of the remedy being a palliative for the disease. The only remedy to dependence on a temporary anodyne is to see that this is what you are doing, where you really are. Because people are not always in a condition to come to this realization by an act of will, traditional psychologies provide methods and materials in which there is a possibility of seeing oneself as one really is. The opportunity occurs again and again through the nature of such a curriculum, and it takes many forms. The forms include literature and the company of other people under circumstances which exclude the urgency to understand instantly or to find complete systems. This may produce the intellectual paradox that you will find the completeness if you are not looking for it, but this is only because the original ailment was to look for something that one did not really want to find. So you can't blame the teaching, you have to look at the student's state. The ordinary reaction to such information as, look at the student, not at the teaching, is for the student to feel guilty or abashed or otherwise to adopt a non-constructive approach. He or she does this only because early training has implanted a signal that a reproach from a source of authority must be responded to by repentance or self-reproach. But self-observation is not the same as self-reproach. There is no harm in being abashed or subject to a sense of personal duty to do something. But when this takes the form of an automatic reaction, without the individual having any option to act or think otherwise, all that is happening is automatism. Almost by definition, I would have said, a student lacks something. That is why he is a student. He probably lacks many things. One of the things which many students lack, and it is no shame so to be, is the capacity to evaluate whether a teaching is complete or not. To evaluate, that is, the teaching itself. In order to miss something, to perceive incompleteness, you must know the thing which you are missing, know the complete thing. It is generally, by the way, the thing that people want, not what they may at any given stage need, which they miss or find wanting. To be really constructive, it is not too much to say that the sense that something is missing is not an occasion to abandon something or to reproach oneself for being inadequate. It is the occasion to gain all-important information that this state of mind is one which needs information about itself and why it thinks like this. Following such information, when it has been thought about, the student can start to make the kind of approaches and ask the kind of questions which really enable him or her to learn, instead of revolving within inaccurate concepts. Understanding. Question. As you know, there are many people throughout the world inducing experiences in others and giving them thereby what are felt to be priceless endowments. Why do the true Sufis not do this? Surely there is an advantage in feeling exalted or contact with the higher beings. Answer: these experiences are subjective and deceptive. If you care to come and sit with me for a few days, you will actually meet long processions of people who call themselves spiritual and who constantly bemoan their loss of these feelings, formerly engendered and so welcomed by them when presented or given by what they regard as higher sources, whether material teachers or immaterial forces. This is the reality, not the occasional person who is still, and temporarily, in a state of exaltation of emotion. This problem is, as Imam Ghazali explains in the third book of his Revival of Religious Sciences, that these experiences are assuaging greed, not replacing it. He relates the parable of the cup of rare pearls. Someone one day presented to a king a most valuable cup, made by joining together numerous rare pearls, and the king was delighted with it. Showing it to a courtier who was also a man of wisdom, the monarch asked him his opinion of it. "This is a calamity," said the other man. "How can that be so?" asked the astonished king. "If it happens to be broken," said the courtier, "you will bitterly regret it, since you will not be able to replace it. If it is stolen, you will miss it excruciatingly." And it did indeed happen that the cup was lost. Thus did the king realize the truth of what the wise man had said. And thus it is, says the Imam, with all things of this world. Simply because one imagines that something which one has is spiritual does not make one's experience of it outside of this world. Indeed, the Sufi teachers constantly speak of the bitterness of deprivation in order to emphasize this distinction, though people think that they are speaking about themselves. Crazes. Question: there is a craze to call oneself a Sufi in the West. At the same time, there are many reputable people in Europe and America who are connected with the Sufis. How can we make sure that the craze does not spoil the name and work of the Sufis? Answer: from time to time there is a craze for almost everything somewhere. The craze dies out, and people do not in any case usually assume that oddities are truly representative of the thing itself. For instance, there is a vegetarian craze, but this does not give vegetables a bad name. It only means that some people are more or less obsessed by vegetables. The craze for pornographic films does not endanger films, and so on. The best safeguard is for normal people to treat the craze, and the crazies, in the way which they deserve. This is easy for us, since the Sufis and Sufism have a reputable ancestry and many normal adherents. Your anxiety may perhaps be allayed by looking at a story which reports something which happened recently. At a diplomatic reception in Bonn, a woman waitress spilt a tray of drinks over a distinguished Middle Eastern ambassador who happens to be a Sufi. She said, "Do forgive me. You see, I am a Sufi. I am not a waitress." The diplomat looked at her and answered, "You thought that you were a Sufi and not a waitress. Well, you may be assured that not only are you not a Sufi, but you really are a waitress." Sinning against God and man. Someone asks me how on earth anyone can have any respect for the Sufis when it is reported that they hold that you can sin against God but not against man. This kind of question provides an ideal opportunity to show how wildly the obsessives who have taken Sufis as their targets will, often unknowingly, distort the facts, and also to recall a very delightful lesson given by one of the ancients. This lesson, valid to this day, is reported of Sheikh Ahmad of Manyar in Bihar, India, who was born in the 13th century, the 7th century of the Islamic era. It is upon the evidence of this story that the allegation against the Sufis is based. A man once visited the sheikh and, not knowing that he was fasting, offered him some food. To refuse food is a discourtesy, and the sheikh immediately ate some. Literalists who were present at once asked the Sufi how he could so lightly break an undertaking made to God. The sheikh answered, "God will forgive the breaking of a fast, but how can one compensate a man for breaking his heart?" In the eyes of the Sufi, a sin against a man, which may include distressing him, is also a sin against God. This kind of thinking, however, is generally appreciated only feebly, if at all, by formalists who are, in reality, frequently less people of religion than people of idolatry. Their idolatry is to the limited number of observances and principles which they recognize, without perceiving the principle which underlies all. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.